Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Okay, well, welcome to Meet the Author. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're talking to Richard Matturro. He's the author of this new book, Leslie. It's a novel, so welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Now, before we start, just give us the short, what I call the capsule biography, and everyone will know who you are, and then we'll talk about your novel, your book.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Rye, New York, which is a suburb of New York City, down in Westchester County. And I came up to the Capital District in 1964 to go to college and never left. I've been here ever since.
Okay.
Majored in English. And for 16 years, I worked across the street here at the Times Union and then took advantage of an early retirement. And now I divide my time between writing and teaching literature at UAlbany.
Okay, and so this is your third novel. So
Yes.
Tell us about Leslie and how mythology goes into it. Then you're going to read a couple little excerpts. So why don't you just...
Okay. Well, I get a lot of my inspiration from mythology, and this book is no exception. Leslie is loosely based on the Odyssey, and if you look at the chapter titles, you'll see things like Lotus Eaters, Cyclops, Scylla and Charybdis.
And she sort of goes on the main character, I should say, is female. She sort of goes on a little odyssey of her own.
Yes. Someone said to me once that when they heard that I taught ancient Greek literature, what do you see in that dry old stuff? I think we have a tendency to think of our own era as complex and sophisticated. But whereas the ancient poets were simple and primitive and artless, but when you really study them, you find out that they were clever old devils, and they might not have been able to invent the incandescent lamp or the internal combustion engine, or God help us, the computer, but they knew the workings of the human heart, and sometimes they show that they know us better than we know ourselves. There's a wonderful scene that I love early on in the Iliad when a Greek warrior meets a Trojan on the battlefield, and before they fight, they have to be sure that they're facing a worthy opponent, and so they have to know each other's heritage. And the Greek asks the Trojan his lineage, and the Trojan gives this famous reply. Why do you ask my birth? The generations of men are like leaves. In autumn the winds scatter them to the ground, and in spring budding trees bring them forth anew. Just so with men. One generation is born, and another dies. Well, despite this eloquent assertion of human transience, the Trojan goes on to recite his pedigree. But in the middle of it, the Greek suddenly stops him, because one of the ancestors of the Trojan, had once befriended the Greek's grandfather. And so by ancient custom, this meant there was a bond between them. So the Greeks suggest that they not fight each other, but instead exchange armor, which was a token of friendship in those days, to which the Trojan readily agrees.
Is this in the middle of a big battle?
Yes, it is. Now, if Walt Disney were telling this story, or Steven Spielberg, or any of our modern myth makers, that's where they'd end it, inviting us to draw from the episode some facile moral about human brotherhood amidst the madness of war, sort of like the Union and Confederate troops on either bank of the Rappahannock singing Silent Night together on Christmas Eve. But Homer wasn't Disney, nor was he Spielberg, and he knew people better. So there's a brief coda afterward. As the two warriors shake hands and part company, we're told that the Trojan had been duped, trading gold armor for bronze. And that, the poet seems to be telling us, is the way the world really works.
Okay, well,
what I especially like to do with my novels is to take an ancient myth and cast it in modern terms and sort of let it loose, just see what happens. And that's what I did with Leslie. Homer's Odyssey, of course, tells the story of Odysseus' struggle to get home to his beloved wife, Penelope, after a 20-year absence. He'd been away at Troy to fight the Trojan War. And
I should say, the novel takes place in Troy, New York.
Yes, it does.
So it starts in
right.
Troy. There you have it.
And on his way home, he has to struggle with disaster, frustration, monsters, and even, as we might put it today, an identity crisis. So in my story, Leslie, the title character, is of Greek descent, something she's very proud of. And she's also been at Troy, as you say. She's a librarian at Troy Public Library. She's in her early 40s, childless, never married, lonely. She's also smart, irreverent, and highly opinionated, as you'll see in the segment I'm going to read. At a dead end in both her job and her personal life, she takes a leave of absence, ostensibly for travel, but really to find some meaning and direction in her life. And that's when she gets the crazy idea of finding Martin, an old boyfriend she'd known 25 years before. She'd spent a summer working with him in an amusement park, Playland amusement park, and that golden summer has remained in her memory, wrapped in myth and nostalgia for the last quarter century.
And then the book is obviously her odyssey. I guess.
Yes, exactly. And the search takes her across the country on this odyssey. And like Odysseus, she must face disaster, frustration, and even monsters. But unlike Odysseus, who never wavers in his desire to get home to Penelope, Leslie faces a dilemma. For all those intervening years, Martin has remained a ghost, safely confined in a protected and cherished corner of her memory. But if she's successful in finding him, the ghost will be transformed into a flesh and blood person. There are 1,000 ways that a human being can be a disappointment, but a ghost is always perfect. So, having lost the young man once, now she risks losing him forever. But there's an even greater threat. When the myth she's woven about her life unravels, what happens to her own identity?
Well, I know there's many references to myth, to all these myths in the book. So I was going to say this book is about a middle-aged librarian having a midlife and identity crisis. So I was going to say, no wonder I liked it.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll...
Yeah, so you're going to read a little excerpt. Just tell us what part of
Yeah,
the...
I'm going to be reading two short excerpts, one from the very beginning of the book and the other from Chapter 2. Chapter 1 is called Siren. Hemlock will do. There's classical precedent after all. 25 centuries ago, hemlock was the poison administered to Socrates. Without protest, the old man tossed it down, then calmly reclined upon his cot. His limbs became heavy, his extremities grew numb, his heart slowed, and he slipped into peaceful oblivion as if he dozed off watching a nature show on public television. Of course, Sheila claims the story is a fraud. She was a botany major in college, and she assures me that hemlock is not quite so benign, not quite so painless. But so what? I could accept a final bellyache in exchange for a death with classical overtones. When I asked Sheila how I could get hold of some hemlock, she refused to tell me. I explained to her that I only wanted to keep it handy in case World War III broke out or I was stricken by incurable illness. But she was afraid I'd use it the next time a man broke up with me. Sheila doesn't think too much of my emotional stability. She needn't have worried, though. I just wanted to store a small bottle of it in my medicine chest to look at once in a while, merely to keep everything else in perspective, like these crow's feet, for instance. That's a wonderful term, isn't it? Crow's feet, for those two crooked arrows that point to the outside corners of your eyes. The crow was an ancient symbol of death, you see. When I was a little girl, my mother used to lament about crow's feet, and I conceived an image of a great black carrion bird setting his mark upon her and claiming her for his. Now I've reached 43. The impressions are beginning to appear on my own face. It doesn't seem very long ago that I used to fret about pimples. So arid a plain is not likely to erupt with youthful vigor again. Don't get me wrong, though. I've never been one of those women who dread getting older. Such an attitude would be common, and as far as I'm concerned, we have only two duties on this earth. One is to avoid egg salad sandwiches, and the other is not to be common. I'm amazed at the lengths to which otherwise intelligent women will go in an effort to dodge looking their age. They don't even seem to realize that all their labor is in vain. Take makeup, for instance. I've never seen any woman's appearance improved by it. In the before and after photos in women's magazines, the before picture always looks better to me than the after. Makeup makes a plain woman look pitiful, an ugly woman look pathetic, and an old woman look hideous, so I never use it. Besides, a person's age is only relative. When Kennedy was elected president, he was the same age as I am now, and people in those days said he was too young to be president. I was just a kid then, and I thought people who said that were crazy. I don't think so anymore. He was too young. To lose your freedom, to lose your precious anonymity forever at such an early age, it's horrifying. I'm not sure I'd want to lose those things at 73, let alone 43. But I'm straying from the point. Aging just isn't the terrible hobgoblin it's made out to be, and there are undeniable benefits of getting older. Through no merit on my part, I've gained more respect from people, more credibility, and along the way I've even acquired a small measure of wisdom and patience. Feeling as I do then, I had not expected to face something as banal as a midlife crisis. When I put in for the leave of absence, Fred, my boss, asked me why I wanted it. What could I tell him? That I'd heard Time's winged chariot at my heels? That I'd found myself bringing up the rear of every funeral I met? That I'd caught a glimpse of the specter down the road, grinning and waiting for me? I told Fred I wanted the leave for some extended travel. He thought that was an excellent idea, and he approved it. Actually, I wanted the leave because my mirror spoke to me one morning. It didn't speak out loud, you understand. I'm not one of those people who have conversations with inanimate objects. Not yet, anyway. But in its silent eloquence, the mirror made an inquiry of me. If I'd anticipated something like this happening at all, I would have expected it a few years ago when I turned 40, since we humans tend to think of our odd years as cosmic milestones. But at that time, the mirror was quiet as the tomb. Instead, it was an ordinary morning in April, just a month ago, while I was getting ready for work. Perhaps it happened because I examined my features a little more critically than usual, or sighed a little more deeply, or frowned a little more intensely. I had just begun to brush my hair. My head tilted to one side, I grimaced as I pulled the brush down through a nest of snarls, when out of the blue, the mirror asked, "Where is she?" The brush arrested in mid-progress. I straightened up and stared at the image staring back at me. Where is she? I knew who the question referred to. An 18-year-old girl leaning over an iron railing, her long hair lifted up behind her by the night breezes blowing in off the water. She was dressed in a faded blue smock, what passed for a uniform, and pinned to her chest was a plastic badge with the image of a seagull on it. The tinny music of a carousel filled the air, and the grating clatter of a roller coaster, and the cries and shrieks of 1,000 strangers. Oh, I knew who she was, all right. I even knew her name, for it was the same as mine, Leslie. But where she was, I had no idea. lost, perhaps, on an island in an unknown sea and longing to come home. The mirror had demanded an answer, though, and I should have had one. That's when I thought of the hemlock. It would have been nice to be able to open my medicine chest and look at it.
Well, as before you do the next one, I just want to say, all through the book, the voice of the narrator, which is female, which we'll talk about, in a minute, but she's very funny, but it's very serious and sometimes dark, but it's sort of a little bit of everything in there. So this obviously is where she starts out on her little journey there. So. Yeah. So now you're going to read another little part from...
Yeah, now, Leslie is in her apartment after her last day at work. She's going to a bar that evening, hoping to meet someone, but ended up coming home alone. Now, with the prospect of 3 months off and no idea how to spend it, at this point she hasn't even conceived the idea of looking for Martin. She lies in bed and can't get to sleep. Oh, by the way, her drink of choice is Retsina, which is if you don't know, it's a Greek...
I don't, but it's all through the book she's drinking, and I'm thinking, I want to try some of that stuff.
It's a Greek wine, and she says she drinks it to stay in touch with her ethnic heritage. Those who are not fond of Retsina say that it reminds them of turpentine.
I know.
Sighing, I turned over on my back again. It was the German poet Heine, I think, cribbing from one of my Greek ancestors who said, "Sleep is good, death better, best never to have been born." Staring wide-eyed at the ceiling, I was enjoying neither sleep, death, nor oblivion. I gave up. From the closet, I plucked a flannel nightgown and slipped it over my head, then turned the light back on in the kitchen. There was an open bottle of Retsina in the refrigerator. I filled a glass, and with this firmly in hand, I went over to the front window and looked out. My apartment is on the first floor of an old brownstone. From the window, I could see a row of buildings similar to mine, each thrusting a stone stairway and a black iron railing onto the sidewalk. The narrow thoroughfare, lit by ancient street lights, could be in any one of 100 old industrial cities in the American Northeast. This one happens to be in Troy, New York, a small metropolis of 50,000 souls, 150 miles due north of New York City. Troy was a factory town at one time, and the factory buildings still line the bank of the Hudson River, but they're all closed. It was known as the Collar City then because in its heyday, Troy had cornered the market on the manufacture of men's detachable shirt collars, a commodity that hasn't been seen now since Calvin Coolidge left the White House. Troy is also the reputed home of Uncle Sam. An enterprising local meat packer named Samuel Wilson obtained a lucrative government contract to supply beef to the Army during the War of 1812. His barrels of provisions were duly stamped with a large U.S., and the grateful troops, so the story runs, accorded him the now famous sobriquet. Troy also functioned as an arsenal for the Union cause during the Civil War, producing cannons and ammunition. It even fashioned the armor used on the Monitor for its historic battle with the Merrimack. But today, the only battles Troy fights are the unglamorous ones all modern cities fight, battles against unemployment, drugs, poverty, homelessness, and general urban decay. When I moved here to take a job after college, I found the city bleak and depressing. I figured I'd stay only a year or two. Now I've lived here nearly half my life. There was very little traffic at this hour, just an occasional vehicle making its way home from a bar or on its way to the next. I suppose I've looked out this window 1,000 times. And the most interesting thing I ever saw was a lover's quarrel. It was past midnight, and they woke me up. They were yelling at the top of their lungs. What's it like to live life at the top of your lungs, to live it in the street and invite the whole world to witness your passion? I wonder what you lose by keeping your most intense feelings within. Does a passion qualify as a passion if you can keep it within? I took a large gulp of Retsina and walked over to my bookshelves. Above them hung Martin's sketch of the magic carpet ride at Playland. Martin had known the girl in the faded blue smock, the girl that the mirror had inquired about. Yes, he had known her, if anyone had known her. Martin had brown eyes, the same color as mine. Where is he now? Married, no doubt, more or less happily. A husband, a father, ensconced in a comfortable home in a comfortable suburb, a full ship and homeward bound, as Melville would have put it. And I am an empty ship and outward bound. Could he be thinking of me at this very moment? The gangly girl he'd known at Playland 25 years ago? Could he have gotten up from his bed, left his pretty wife sleeping peacefully, and looked out his window? Could he be thinking of that long-haired girl who fell in love with him a lifetime ago? Couldn't he be doing this too? I scowled, drained the Retsina. No, he couldn't. Maybe reading would make me drowsy. I'm an expert on books. Excuse me, miss, I'm looking for something to read that will put me to sleep. I'm suffering from insomnia, brought on by frustrated libido, advancing middle age, acute loneliness, and severe anxiety at the prospect of taking a trip God knows where by myself. What would you suggest? I have just the thing for you. Take this. Moby Dick? It works for most people. But I've read it 6 times. It's my favorite book. I'm sorry, then. You're not normal, and I can't help you. I never intended to be a librarian when I was growing up. Few people do. I was a classics major in college, Latin and Greek. How I intended to make a living with such a major is anybody's guess. You didn't think about trivial things like that back in the 60s. But I liked to read, and I needed a job, so in grad school I got a library degree and joined the ranks of forlorn individuals seeking a haven in those high stacks. There are probably odd ducks in every profession. If mine seems to attract more than its share of life's misfits, it should be noted on balance that no librarian has ever been accused of malpractice or ambulance chasing. And though it may seem as if we labor in a sanctuary, a pillared temple guarded by a brace of stone lions, the retreat is at most only partial. For those of us who work in public libraries, especially city libraries, the world with all its problems is not only at our doorstep, but enters the very heart of our citadel. Troy Public Library, where I work, is right downtown, so it attracts not only school children doing projects and business people on their lunch hour, but also folks who just wander in to get out of the elements. Most of them don't cause any trouble, really, and they ask little of us except to be left alone. A few mutter to themselves, others fall asleep, and then there are those who form an attachment to you, like Jeff, for instance. I returned to the kitchen table and refilled my glass. Jeff is mad. A psychiatrist, no doubt, would have a more technical term for what is wrong with him, but in any age other than ours, he would simply be called mad. Not that he's wild or violent or anything like that, but he's a member of that exclusive fraternity which goes all the way back to the very beginning of human history. The path he treads may parallel our own, but in its sublime meandering, it disappears into valleys we cannot see, and it climbs heights too dizzying for us to withstand. Sometimes a week or two will pass and I won't see Jeff. Other times I will see him 10 days running. But he had been absent from the library for nearly a month now, and I wondered if the improved weather had coaxed him out of doors. In any case, my mind had not been on Jeff today. There was the impending leave, for one thing, and there was also the unpleasant meeting that Sheila and I had been summoned to in Fred's office. When we returned to the main reading room to relieve Bruce, though, an elderly lady approached the desk. Bruce cleared his throat. "Can I help you?" "I thought you should know. There's a young man over there ripping pages out of the magazines." Sheila looked at me. "It's your friend again. Let me go and talk to him." I found Jeff seated on the floor in the periodical section. Sporting longish hair and a neatly trimmed beard, he might have blended in with young people anywhere. But rain or shine, summer or winter, he always wore a great brown overcoat. This spread on the floor around him like a bridal train. With great care, he was tearing a photograph out of Time magazine while other patrons looked on aghast. "Hi, Jeff." He stopped what he was doing and smiled up at me. "Leslie, how are you?" I'm fine, I said, kneeling beside him. What are you doing? I'm getting rid of these for you. He was holding the photo of an Arab youth lying in the center of the road, his head resting in a great smear of blood. In a small pile, Jeff had stacked several similar pictures of violence taken from current news magazines. You shouldn't tear those out, Jeff. Why not? I took the photo from him and put my hand under his elbow, helping him up. There might be a coupon for an Egg McMuffin on the back. Come on, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. Sheila stood watching me over her reading glasses, disapproval on her features. I handed her the stack of photos and the mutilated magazine as we walked by. Cover for me for a little while, will you? It was a blustery spring day. The sky half vibrant blue, half billowy white, and the wind was whipping through the downtown streets. I wished that I was wrapped in a great coat like Jeff had, but he seemed oblivious to the chill and wore it open so that it fanned out behind him like a cape. Jeff, why do you... He suddenly stopped, leaned back and closed his eyes. The uncertain glory of an April day. I don't want to play today, Jeff. Besides, it's May. He ignored me and repeated more insistently, the uncertain glory of an April day. Jeff, give up? Two Gentlemen of Verona. I bet you haven't even read that one. I haven't, but listen. You ought to. It's about these two fellows who love the same girl. Have you ever had two fellows love you at the same time, Leslie? No, I'd settle for one. He laughed uproariously, bending way over to experience the laugh more fully. Passers-by looked at him, then at me. Jeff, I said, once I had gotten him to resume walking, you have to stop ripping up the magazines. They're not going to let you in anymore. It's your turn. I told you I don't want to play today. I want to talk to you. Come on, just one. No. All right, then forfeit. My turn. Jeff, you're not listening to me. Silence that dreadful bell. Jeff, silence that dreadful... I grabbed him by the sleeve and pulled him to a halt. Othello. Now will you listen to me? He stood docilely. I know you like to come into the library, Jeff, but if you rip up the magazines, you won't be able to anymore, and there won't be anything I can do about it. Do you understand? He nodded. In a softer voice, I asked, why do you do it? He made no reply except to smile sheepishly. It doesn't do any good. People can just go look at the pictures somewhere else. He began to hum to himself. I sighed and let go of his sleeve. Jeff, will you promise me you won't do it again? His hand went up. I swear to thee by Cupid's strongest bow. Romeo and Juliet? Midsummer Night's Dream, your turn. Come on my right hand, for this ear is deaf. Julius Caesar, good one. At the Coffee Time restaurant, Jeff took one of the window stools that looked out onto the street. I brought 2 steaming mugs from the counter. I haven't seen you around for a while, Jeff. Where have you been? Away. Away? Where? France. France? He spread his arms. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Henry V. When on earth do you find time to read so much? At night, while the nuts are watching TV. What nuts? The nuts I live with. I live in a nut house. You don't live in a nut house. I know where you live. Where do I live? He flashed a challenging grin. I hesitated, embarrassed suddenly. You live in the group home, right? Over on 4th Street. The nut house, he repeated with finality. But don't they have any other books there? Why do you always read Shakespeare? I'm improving my mind, what's left of it. He took a gulp of coffee. Once I read the Bible. Did you? The people who run the nut house are always talking about Jesus. They tell us they want us to find Jesus, so I read about him. What did you learn? If he was alive today, we'd be roommates. Jeff laughed loudly at this and banged his spoon on the table to show his pleasure. I glanced over at the proprietor and several patrons who looked at him with alarm. I put my hand on the spoon. What religion are you, Leslie? I was raised Catholic. My mother's Catholic. My father was Greek Orthodox. Greek Orthodox? Do they believe in Jesus? More or less. Most of the nuts go to church on Sunday mornings, but I don't. Do you go to church? No. Why not? I shrugged my shoulders. I guess I'm not very religious. Do you believe in God? No. No God at all? No. He pondered this. Well, I like to keep an open mind. Of course, that's easy for me since half my mind's gone anyway. He laughed, picked up the spoon again, but I had my hand clasped around it before he could bring it down. So what do you do instead? I asked. Instead of what? Going to church. I walk. Where? Everywhere. I go all over. I go down to the river. Sometimes I go up on the hill. Have you ever climbed to those stone steps up there? You mean the approach? Yes, once I did, when I first moved here. Sometimes I sit up there all Sunday morning. You can see the whole city and hear the church bells all over town. Nobody knows you're there. It's as if you're a spy or an angel or something. I love it up there. Stairs that don't lead anywhere, columns that don't hold up anything. It's like a ruin. I think it used to be a shortcut to the college 100 years ago, before there were cars and buses. So all the people who used to climb those steps are dead now. Yes. And someday we'll be dead too. Yes. He studied me. You like working in the library, Leslie? Not too much. You should come with me instead. I probably should. But where have you been, Jeff? I haven't seen you in a long time. He gazed idly out the window. Over in Albany, at the hospital. Oh. We both fell silent. I took a sip of coffee, then put down my cup. Jeff, I really want you to keep the promise you made me. What promise? About the magazines. Oh, yeah, sure. I want you to keep it because I'm going to be leaving for a while. His head snapped back from the window. Where are you going? On a trip. So I want you to be on your best behavior while I'm gone. How long are you going to be away? I don't know. Are you coming back? I sighed. I'm not sure. He looked out the window again and began twisting one of the large buttons on his coat. Quietly, he said, Take me with you. I don't think the people who run your home would like that. Screw them. Why are you going away anyway? I'm looking for someone. Who, a man? No, a girl. What girl? Where is she? Exactly. He narrowed his eyes. You're not married, are you, Leslie? No. If you were married, you wouldn't be going away. Probably not. Would you like to marry me? I smiled. I think I'm too old for you, Jeff. He turned to the window again. After a moment, he drained his coffee and stood up. Do you have someplace to go? I asked. There was more than a hint of reprimand in his voice. Always. You think just because I'm a nut I don't have business? He left the table. For every man hath business and desire, such as it is. He stopped and turned around, eyed me suspiciously. Hamlet. I'll miss you, Jeff. His lips curled slyly. In the deep ghost voice of Hamlet's father, he intoned, Adieu, 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 remember me. Then, with a flourish, he pushed his way out into the sunlight.
Well, I have to say, as both a native of Troy and a librarian, I think you captured them both there. But so people, when they hear that, will want to find out what happens to Leslie. But my question now is, why you've written this book in the first-person narration from a woman's point of view? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure. Well, I should probably then give a little history of this. Although it is the third novel I've published, it was actually the second one that I completed, and the first one that I ever started. I actually began this book, believe it or not, when I was 28 years old. And when I consider that next week I'll be eligible for Social Security, I'm reminded of the ancient Greeks saying, the mills of the gods grind slow. So although the other two books are in the third person, and this is the first person, it's not like I went from that to this, it was the other way around. So this was the first one I ever wrote, at least started to write.
And you just put it aside all these years, or back and forth? Or
It was put aside for a good number of years,
Okay.
and then picked up in earnest in the 80s, in the late 80s.
after your other two books came out? or-
After the first one,
Okay.
Troy, came out. Now, the writing from a woman's point of view. Okay, I won't pretend that that this is anything unique with me. Men have written from women's points of view. Women have written from men's points of view many times. So there's nothing unique about that. I would also say that there was a certain amount of challenge involved, not to say chutzpah, but there was a strong desire to be on the inside of this character. You can get very close to characters in the third person, of course, but somehow the discipline of the first person forces you to be in their mind always and no one else's mind. And I liked that. I really wanted to do Leslie in that fashion. I wish I could say that I worked really hard to imitate, what a female voice sounds like, what female thinking sounds like, but I didn't work hard at it. Leslie just came to me, fully blown, and I didn't have to invent her voice.
I mean, when you first started writing it 28 years ago, it was in the...
Yep.
Okay.
The voice was already there. That kind of sarcastic, knowing, clever, opinionated voice was there. She fascinated me because she was androgynous, for one thing, uncomfortable being a woman, uncomfortable with the roles thrust upon her.
Well, I think there's a scene in the book where her sister says, "You're not even a woman," or something,
Yes,
something like
exactly.
that.
And she yells back, I'm not a woman, I'm a human being. And so for a man to write a story of an androgynous woman, well, half the work has been done for him. So that made it easier. Also, I was interested in one particular quality that she had, and that is the ability to be both independent and loyal at the same time. I think a lot of people find those two qualities inconsistent, and male and female. But I guess women have an even larger trouble with that, maintaining both of those. But I think Leslie, it can be fiercely independent and fiercely loyal at the same time.
Well, it turns out, I mean, we're not going to be giving anything away. When she does come across the person from 25 years past, her loyalty is still there. I mean.
Yeah. So that fascinated me about her, and that was another reason why I wanted to do her from the inside as a first person.
Well, you mentioned, besides Shakespeare, which you just mentioned, you have all these mythological themes and mythology, and I was wondering, how could myths, I guess mythology you could say is the foundation of culture and religion and mythology. Do you think, I guess my question would be, do you think novels are sort of like modern myths? Do they serve the same purpose, you think, as myths in the past? I mean, there's stories.
Yeah.
Myths are stories. You've written a story.
Yeah.
How do you think? How can you fit that together?
Well, I think in a way they are, and myths have never died. Myths aren't something from the distant past. We just think of them differently today. We don't even necessarily use the word, but we're doing the same thing.
I mean, we may even call them a movie or something.
Well, we may even just call them our lives.
Yeah.
We still have baffling phenomena which we can't understand. Only it's not earthquakes and solar eclipses or thunder anymore, because we understand those marvels.
Yeah.
It's other things that we don't understand. For instance, how is it that a young soldier comes home unhurt and his buddy who was standing next to him was blown away? Or how is it that intense love between two people over time can turn into intense hatred? If you want to hear a modern version of a myth, ask a friend sometime to tell you about their divorce. You'll hear a story. Now, this will be a story of their life. You'll hear a story. It may not be one you want to hear, but you'll hear it. It will have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It will probably have a hero and a villain, and you can guess ahead of time who the villain's going to be. And the conclusion of the story will be the result of an inevitable series of events in the story. And as we listen to this, we nod our heads, but we take it with a grain of salt, because we understand that the facts have been arranged a certain way. Some have been maximized, some have been minimized, some have been left out entirely, and some perhaps even fabricated.
Well, depending on the author, or the speaker.
Well, the speaker. And does this mean that the friend is lying? I would say not exactly, because myths aren't lies, no more than art and literature are lies. Myths are the way we organize joy, pain, grief, sorrow, even disaster into a cohesive history we can accept. So so I think myths are always with us.
Well, I was just, when you were saying that, I was recently reading something by V.S. Naipaul. He said everything is narration. I was thinking of that when I was reading your book. But so you think that I guess we live by stories.
Yes.
Yeah,
including our lives. We have an auto accident, for instance. I mean, eventually you start telling it as a story to people. And you might simplify it a bit. And certain facts you might not know exactly where this car came from or how the other one slid into you. But as you tell the story, it starts to make better and better sense the way you're telling it. And in a way, you have mythologized it.
yes.
Because now it's something you can remember. And eventually, the more you tell the story, I'm not going to say the better it gets, but the more pared down it gets to the one version which you can always tell. And I think that's a myth in a way.
Well, now we have the paradox I want to ask you about, because we just talked about myths. Your book has myths. However, we have a character in your book who twice says people shouldn't be deluded by myths.
Yeah.
So I guess, how would you explain this paradox? You know, you're talking about myths and stories, and you have someone say twice, people shouldn't be deluded by myths.
Sure. Well, because there is always a dark side. The Nazis had the myth of racial superiority, and tens of thousands of people bought into it, believed in it. So you can have a dark side of a myth, and you don't even have to go back that far. Read any daily newspaper of the latest terrorist attack, and you realize that, again, you can buy into terribly destructive, delusive myths, dark myths that cause untold trouble. So yeah, there are myths that uplift us and keep us going, and there are other myths that are destructive.
Well, the book is set in 1989. I was just wondering, any particular reason why? I noticed when she's in the library, you didn't mention the internet. So
Yes, it was 1989. This is partly for practical reasons. This is when I finished the major version of this. I mean, I've been tinkering with it ever since, but it was actually written then. Okay. So, and Leslie is 43 in 1989, and therefore she was a teenager in the middle 60s. Now, if she was 43 today, she would have been a teenager in the middle 80s, which was an entirely different era. Yeah. So it just wouldn't work. And the other thing I liked about 1989 is that it was kind of a pivotal year in the history of the world. This was it was actually the month of Tiananmen Square, which is mentioned in the story.
I think, there's a scene when she's watching TV of the Tiananmen Square.
And within a year, the Soviet Union had collapsed. Eastern Europe went free. So I like the idea that this was a transition year for the world, and that that's a transition year for her also.
Let's see. I wanted to ask you. I'm not sure if you answered this yet. You might have. What do you think? You write fiction. This is your third book. What's this urge behind? What's the urge to write fiction, to make things up?
Well,
I mean, you've been tinkering with this, you said, for how many, 28 years?
Yes, well, not continually, but yes, on and off.
I mean, of course, it might be like, why did Melville write Moby Dick? I know Moby Dick's one of your favorite books, but
Yeah.
what's this urge to tell a story, I guess?
Well, storytelling is fun. I have to admit that. But I would also be the first to admit that that plots interest me less than characters. I love to create characters, well, you and I and everybody else are made of protoplasm, but literary characters, fictional characters, are made of words, and that is fascinating in itself. And yet some of them live as much as those of us who are made of protoplasm. We get to know them just as well. And so the interesting thing for me is one, to create them, and then, of course, once created, you want everybody else to know them too. It's sort of like having a child, which I don't have. But if you had a child, you would not want to keep it in the closet at home, at least if you were a sane individual. You would want that child to go out, and you would like it to meet your friends. You would like the child to meet the world to meet the child. And so I feel that way about characters also. I certainly want them to be shared by other people, want them to know them. The famous one is, how was it said once? Oh, about Hamlet. Hamlet is the most interesting person who never lived. And that's the idea.
Well, your book sort of goes from, I know, again, we're talking about made-up stories, but your book sort of goes from a fantasy, not fantastical, but, you know, she gets 3 months off, she's going to go on a trip, she has this fantasy, but it ends up being sort of grounded really in reality. She does come by the end, which we don't want to give the end away for people who are going to read the book. I guess, how would you see the ending? I mean, she does come to some realization, she does find the person, but it's not really this mythological kind of story, or it's not a fantasy, it's not a chick lit kind of ending, I guess you could say. Do you find it? I mean, I'm trying to think. It's very grounded in reality. She's faced some human truths, I guess you could say, about how life really is, I guess, even though it's a made-up character. You know, but so I guess, how would you see the ending? I'm trying to decide whether it's happy or not. It's not really sad, but it's realistic, I guess. Talk about the ending without giving anything away, because we want
Okay, I'll do that, and I would say you have the exact right response. If you're asking, is this happy or not? That's
just
good.
His life. It just is.
This is that's a good response to the end. I mean, from the author's point of view, that's a very good response. When one goes on a quest, and this is what Leslie does in a way. And if you've read your Joseph Campbell, you know what that's like. You have to leave home and go to some unfamiliar place. Usually, it's fraught with danger and peril. And you're either hunting something, you have to battle something, or searching for something, and then at the end, whether or not you've achieved it, you come home again. I mean, this is the classic quest. But the important thing in that quest is not the thing out there. The important thing is always the thing in here. You come back having become a man, or a woman, or embodying your name, or you come back being the person you were meant to be, or you come back finding yourself the person you feared to be. But so the quest always is internal, even though physically it takes you away from home and then brings you back again. So I think in that sense, Leslie has gone on this quest. And whether or not she has achieved the ostensible goal is almost irrelevant, because the real goal is inside. And I think by the end she reaches an equilibrium. And I think her mention of, and I don't think this gives anything away, her mention of the hemlock in the last chapter is telling.
From the very opening up section.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, thank you. Now I'm going to just show these. We got this book is Leslie. Richard did a couple of readings. You're going to want to read it. You do have 2 other books, which our library does have. One's called Luna. It's also a novel. And then this is a book called Troy, which is a retelling, I think, of the Iliad. Is that?
Well, it's the story of the Trojan War, and it too is a novel. It's told in novel fashion.
Okay, so our library has all 3 books, and are you, before we end, are you working on anything else? Are you going to be?
Well, I recently finished the third in this trilogy, which I call my Tri-City trilogy, because they're each one is connected to one of the 3 adjoining cities: Albany, Schenectady, and Troy.
Oh, these 3. Okay.
Yes, not Troy there in your stack, but the one I just completed is called Janie, and they're a trilogy, not in the sense that it's a continuing story, and there are no repeating characters. In fact, they're not even chronological, but they're connected thematically. They're all about characters who face midlife dilemmas about sexuality, your place in the world, parenthood, existential angst.
Well, I think Leslie goes through all these. So.
Yes, that's right.
So in the book is called Janie, but it's not out yet.
Not out yet. I have an agent trying to sell it right now. So the Luna is the one tied to Albany, Leslie is the one tied to Troy, and Janie is the one tied to Schenectady. It's the center one, actually. Okay, well, when Janie comes out, please come back and talk to us again and tell us about it, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Joe.
Well, thanks for watching Meet the Author, and we'll see you next time.